I still remember the smell of cheap plywood and the monotonous whir of an old space heater humming in the corner of the gas station. The small cafe next door had only two plastic tables, a few expired creamers, and a pot of black coffee I had poured 3 hours earlier. The cup still sat there, dark and stone cold, like the rest of the morning that had already died. No one came back. No familiar car stopped at the door. No sound of children laughing. No guilty glance. No explanation breaking the silence between the wind slipping through the doorframe and the sigh of a 70-year-old man left behind like forgotten luggage no one wanted to reclaim. My name is Harold Whitman. I used to be a devoted father, a loving husband, a grandfather who never missed a birthday and always sent Christmas gifts on time. I used to believe those things were enough to keep a place in my son's heart. But that Saturday morning, sitting quietly at a rest stop along Highway 16, about 30 miles west of Macon, Georgia, I realized something far more bitter than any cold cup of coffee I had ever tasted. They had left, and they had no intention of coming back. "Sit tight here, Dad," Brian said as he parked in front of the restrooms. "We'll be right back. Jenna wants to check the forest trail map, and the kids need to stretch their legs a bit." "Sure," I replied with a smile. "I'm in no rush." I didn't think I had done anything wrong. I nodded, picked up my coat bag, and got out of the car like any kind, reasonable father would do. I didn't realize that everything I needed, my heart medication, wallet, backup phone, and return plane ticket, was all locked in the trunk of the silver SUV Brian was driving. When the car turned around, my eyes stayed on the tree line, thinking they were just circling the small forest nearby. But then 1 hour passed, then two, then three. I started to feel cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from weather. That morning was warm, early fall, but the kind that comes from within. Cold from realizing all the little details I had missed throughout the trip. Jenna had been unusually quiet, even though she used to chat with me about everything from recipes to Caleb's schoolwork. Brian had laughed too much, the kind of laugh that didn't reach his eyes. And both children, Nora and Caleb, held their tablets like shields between them and their grandfather. I made phone calls. No one picked up. Once, twice, 5 times. I tried texting, keeping it short and calm. "Is everything okay? I'm still at the rest stop." No reply. I walked around, saw strangers pumping gas. A few pickup trucks from the countryside rolled in and out. I asked the girl behind the counter, a young woman named Kayla, if she had seen them leave. She shook her head. "I haven't seen anyone like that drive off. I'm sure they'll come back." I couldn't believe I had been left behind. I had survived the Cold War, unemployment, the loss of my wife, and standing alone at my best friend's funeral. But never had I felt as hollow and small as I did that morning, standing in an unfamiliar rest stop, with the wind sneaking under my coat and a coffee cup that had long lost its warmth. I opened my phone and scrolled through Facebook, looking for something familiar. And right there, I came across a post that had gone viral. A 75-year-old woman abandoned by her family at a rest stop during a cross-state trip. The author said she sat for 6 hours before a stranger helped her get a ride home. The comments were burning with outrage. "That's just cruel. How could a child do that to their mother? These people are monsters." I read every line, not because I felt pain for that woman, but because I was living her story. I was the next version, the one left behind with no one to speak up. I wasn't trending. I didn't go viral. I only had a cold coffee cup, a pair of burning eyes, and a truth breaking silently inside me. I had been erased from my family's map of belonging. Outside the glass window, the day had tilted toward evening. Golden sunlight spilled across the asphalt like it was trying to expose a stain I could no longer hide. I pressed my hands against the table, heard the cracking of my joints, and asked myself, at this age, do I still have to learn one more lesson about betrayal? They thought I would call in tears. They thought I would stay silent. They thought I no longer had the strength to get back up. But they forgot something important. I am Harold Whitman, the man who kept his vow to his late wife, the man who once pulled his son out of bankruptcy with the last of his savings, and also the man holding the deed to the house they live in, the one they believe is theirs. I slowly pushed the coffee cup aside. I stood up, picked up my phone, and began looking for the road back. Not just to my house, but to my dignity. And they would soon understand one thing. You don't leave behind a man who has already lost everything and still survived. It happened on a spring night when I was sitting alone in the old kitchen, yellow light spilling across the scratched wooden table, and the chirping of crickets echoing outside the screen door. It was close to 10 at night. I had just turned off the pest news and was about to put away the last glass of milk when the phone rang. The screen showed the name Brian, along with a family photo taken during our trip to SeaWorld last year. I remember my son's voice that night, hesitant, hoarse, and carrying a kind of panic I hadn't heard since the day he fell off his bike as a child and scraped his knees. "Dad," he began, "can we talk for a bit? Just you and me?" I went into the bedroom, closed the door, sat on the bed. "What's wrong, Brian?" And then the downpour began. Brian said the bank was threatening to foreclose on the house. Jenna's company had laid off staff. The real estate market had slowed. Caleb's tuition hadn't been paid. They had only 3 weeks left to keep their home in Savannah. He spoke as if everything was crumbling. But what choked me wasn't the situation. It was his voice. He was crying. "I know I've messed up in a lot of ways," he said between sobs. "But you're the only one left who can help me now. Please, Dad, if we lose the house, I don't know what to do." I stayed quiet for a while. Something stirred in me. Not pity, but something closer to memory. The memory of the time I borrowed $800 from my father in 1978 to fix up the Chevrolet Impala after an accident. He didn't ask what I'd done wrong. He just gave me the money and said, "Live in a way that someday you'll do this for someone else." I had done that. I had helped strangers, co-workers, neighbors, my wife, and now my son. I didn't have much left, but I thought I had enough. "How much do you need?" I asked. He hesitated as if he had just swallowed the last of his pride. 90,000, enough to save the house. "I'll pay you back, I promise." 90,000, 90. The money I had saved over more than 25 years. My retirement fund, plus what I made selling my old car last year. I had planned to use that to renovate the house in Asheville, install a handrail, slip-proof the bathroom. But I didn't need a beautiful house if my son no longer had one at all. "All right," I said, "but I want you to sign a loan agreement, and the house has to be under my name until you pay it off." Brian hesitated. Then he said, "I understand. Send the papers. I'll sign." I called my wife's old lawyer, Mr. Wallace, a kind, principled man who never forgot to remind me of the consequences of every decision. "Are you sure, Harold?" he asked. "This is a big amount. No real collateral except the house." "I don't need much collateral," I replied. "I need my son to have a chance." We drafted an internal loan agreement, signed, notarized. I wired the money through the bank and added a red star next to the note. "Loan with lien to secure residence at 1825 Watson Drive, Savannah, Georgia." A few days later, I received a thank you email from Jenna. Cold and formal, no phone call, no handwritten note from the kids. But I didn't mind. I thought they were just trying to get their life back on track. I returned to my routine, grocery shopping every Tuesday morning, reading, gardening, FaceTiming with Nora on Sunday evenings. But the calls became fewer, the visits postponed. Every time I suggested coming down to Savannah, Brian would say, "It's a busy season," or "The house is under renovation," or "Caleb's got finals coming up." I didn't doubt it. I used to believe that love in a family didn't need verification. Then one day I saw Jenna post a photo of the family celebrating Caleb's birthday at a fancy Italian restaurant. I wasn't invited, I wasn't informed, and when I texted happy birthday, the message showed sent, but never read. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the calendar on the wall, counting the moments I had missed, family moments that once were sacred. I asked myself if I had made a mistake giving away the money. But every time I started to blame myself, I remembered Brian crying on the phone like a lost child, and I chose to believe those tears were real. What I didn't know at the time was that the greatest act of love in my life was also the final trap they had laid for me. I had signed a contract with trust. They had read it as a document of ownership waiting to be exploited. And 6 months later, I was sitting alone at a rest stop on Highway 16, hands trembling from the cold, and holding onto a contract that lived only in memory. The last proof that I was once the father they needed. I still keep those messages on my phone, not because I can't forget, but because I want to remember exactly when I started getting pushed out, like a man trying to pinpoint the moment the door was quietly shut in his face, not with a loud slam, but with a cold, steady silence. The first time was Nora's birthday. She had just turned 7. I remember preparing the gift carefully, a professional set of colored pencils and a real leather sketchbook, because I had once heard Jenna say Nora liked to draw. I ordered it from a small shop in Asheville. They wrapped it in handmade paper, and I personally brought it to the post office to make sure it arrived on time. I thought I would at least receive a photo of her hugging the gift, or maybe Brian would call to say thank you. But no, the entire birthday passed in silence. That evening, I opened Facebook and saw Jenna had posted pictures of the party at home. Balloons, cake, adults and children. Even her side of the family was there. But not me. No notice, no apology afterward. I didn't say anything. I told myself maybe they forgot. Maybe they were busy. I sent a message. Happy birthday, Nora. I hope she had a wonderful day. The message was seen 2 hours later. No reply. After that, the calls got shorter. The Sunday FaceTime calls, which had been a routine between me and Caleb, were canceled because he was studying or out with friends or eating. I asked Jenna a few times. She replied, "The kids are growing up. They have their own world." One evening I called and Brian answered but didn't turn on the camera. We spoke for less than 3 minutes. I asked how he was doing. He gave short answers. I said I wanted to come down to Savannah. He went silent for a while, then said, "I don't think it's a good time, Dad. Jenna is stressed. Caleb has exams. Nora gets sick easily. If you come and we can't host you properly, it'd be awkward." Awkward. That word was like a tiny cut that hit just the right spot. I had carried Brian through nights of high fever, sold my favorite car to cover his hospital bills. Never once felt awkward. I had stood in the snow waiting for him to come out of school just so he'd get home safe. And now my presence had become inconvenient. I started to feel like one of those decorative items you place behind glass, only taken out for holidays or family photos. But now they didn't even open the cabinet anymore. Once, I sent an email offering to help with Caleb's future college tuition. He was only in 5th grade, but I wanted to be ready. Brian didn't respond. Jenna replied briefly, "Thank you, Dad. We'll think about it." Nothing more. Slowly, I realized I was no longer part of the decision circle. Not consulted, not heard. I was only allowed to exist, quietly, outside the thick glass walls of their household. Each time I called, Jenna's voice seemed to teeter on the edge of patience. "Dad, I'm cooking right now. We're taking the kids to school. We're at the grocery store. Just text later." "Okay." I tried calling back later. She didn't answer anymore. Only Brian's voice came through, less and less frequent, like a weak signal about to drop. One time I drove down to Savannah without telling them, a drive of more than 300 miles, just to find the house had been repainted, security cameras installed, and when I knocked on the door, I only heard the curtains shuffle behind the glass. Brian opened it. His face looked startled, as if he had seen an intruder. "You didn't tell me you were coming," he said, hand gripping the door frame, not inviting me in. "I thought families didn't need appointments," I answered. He gave a strained smile. "It's not that. We just have guests today." I still wasn't invited in. I handed over the gift bag for Caleb and Nora and stood there for 5 minutes in the yard. The kids peeked out, said "Thank you, Grandpa," then disappeared. No hugs, no laughter. I stood there in front of the house I had saved with every penny of my retirement, a house I was no longer welcome in. That night I slept at a motel 10 miles away. Yellowed lights, TV sounds leaking from the room next door. I stared at the ceiling, my fingers slightly trembling, heart heavy like a stone at the bottom of a well. I began to understand, truly understand, that I was being emotionally managed. They didn't want me angry, didn't want me sad, but they also didn't want me present. They needed me when they were desperate. But once the crisis passed, I became a reminder of the weakness they wanted to forget. They couldn't erase the loan agreement, so they erased me with silence. They couldn't return the $90,000, so they pretended it never existed. I went back to Asheville, mowed the lawn, read the paper, kept living. But that feeling of being pushed out, little by little, slipped into my dreams. I started to fear the sound of the phone because I knew there would no longer be a call that said, "Grandpa, when will you visit? Dad, I miss you." Those words had vanished, like I had finished playing the role of father and grandfather, and they quietly retired the part. Summer passed, with mornings where I sat at a three-chair dining table using only one, afternoons walking through the park with no hand to hold, dinners where I turned on the radio just to hear a voice, and I thought I could get used to that. Until the day Brian called to invite me on a late summer family trip, a trip where I would later be left at a rest stop with a cold cup of coffee and burning eyes. That was no longer a sign. That was a sentence. I didn't tell anyone. No message, no phone call. I just drove straight down to Savannah on Saturday morning, carrying a small gift bag, some pastries I had baked the night before, a set of old leather-bound children's books for Nora, and a pair of museum passes for Caleb. I imagined, or perhaps hoped, that the kids would cheer when they saw their grandpa, and Brian might feel a little moved that his old father had come all that way. I told myself, sometimes all it takes is one more gesture, one more time reaching out. That's what family is. But the moment I turned onto their familiar street, something in my chest tightened. I didn't recognize the house. The old ivory-colored home had been repainted a shade of slate blue, the kind you see in design magazines. New roofing, the wooden fence replaced with sleek black metal rails. On the perfectly trimmed lawn sat a brand new BMW SUV gleaming in the sunlight. I stopped across the street and looked through the windshield. I couldn't tell if this was progress or betrayal. I stepped out with the gift bag in hand. It was warm outside, but my chest felt cold. The front door opened after 3 rings. It wasn't Brian. It wasn't Jenna. It was a woman in her 30s wearing a beige housekeeper's uniform. "Who are you here to see?" she asked, glancing quickly at my bag and clothes. "I'm Harold, Brian's father. I'm here to visit." She looked uneasy. "I'm not sure if the family's home today. Let me check." I stood there waiting. The sound of the air conditioner blowing from inside came through the crack in the door. I heard soft music, glasses clinking, and children's laughter. I recognized Caleb's voice. Still as bright as ever. Still my grandson. A moment later, Brian appeared at the door. Short-sleeved shirt, glass of wine in hand, eyes wide as if he'd seen a ghost. "Dad, why didn't you call first?" "I didn't think I needed to. I just wanted to see the kids. I brought a few things for them." I raised the gift bag. Brian hesitated. A long pause. We're having a small gathering. Just some of Jenna's coworkers stopping by. The house is a bit messy." I glanced inside. It wasn't messy. The living room had been completely redecorated. Italian leather sofa, new chandelier, shelves lined with family photos. None of them with me. The dining table was set with fancy appetizers. 3 couples, all strangers to me, were laughing and toasting. No one looked toward the door. "Where's Nora?" I asked. She's taking a nap. "Caleb, he's busy studying." I didn't say anything else. I didn't want to intrude. I didn't want to plead. I just stood there, waiting for Brian to finish the sentence he was trying to wrap in polite packaging. "Maybe another time, Dad. I'll make arrangements so you can see the kids privately. Today's just not convenient. Inconvenient." That was the second time I'd heard that word in 2 months. I don't remember how long I stood there. I just remember walking back to my car. My shadow stretched long across the newly tiled path. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't hand over the gift. I placed it quietly on the doorstep, like an Amazon delivery man. Then I got into the car, drove away, never looked back. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because the tears couldn't come anymore. They had lodged somewhere between my throat and stomach, hardened into a stone. I had been replaced, not by a specific person, but by convenience, by image, by the exterior they were busy constructing. A new house, a new car, new friends, but no place for the old father. I drove straight to Tybee Beach, the place my wife and I visited back in 1982. I sat there and opened my phone, scrolled through old pictures. Brian at age 3, riding on my shoulders in the ocean, a family photo in front of our first house, Caleb's birthday last year, the only recent photo that still had me in it. Then I looked at Jenna's newest post, the party today, tagged friends, the decorated table, the gifts, the balloon that said new chapter. I zoomed in on one photo. Behind Jenna was a large framed print. Family, our roots, our wings. Beneath it were labeled photo frames. Caleb, Nora, Jenna, Brian, and one small empty spot, still blank. I knew who should have been there. I looked out toward the horizon as the sky darkened into early evening. I felt cheated, not of money, but of belief. The belief that I was still part of this family they spoke of, that my quiet sacrifices were something they would honor, that I saved that house not to be locked out of it. But then I remembered. That house, 1825 Watson Drive, had never really been theirs. They lived in it, Ines, but I still held the title under the loan contract. They renovated it, bought the car, threw the party, all on the foundation of money I withdrew from my retirement fund. And I still had the documents. I still had the right. I once thought I would never use it. But that evening on Tybee Beach, as the wind blew my hat off, something rose in me that was no longer pain. It was clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. "Sit here for a bit, Dad," Brian said as the car came to a stop on the cracked asphalt outside a rest stop near the entrance to a Coney National Forest. "Jenna wants to check the trail map again, and the kids need to run around a little." I nodded, unbuckled my seatbelt, and didn't ask anything else. They all got out, shutting the doors hard. I could still hear the kids' gigglings as they ran across the patch of red dirt and gravel. I stayed put, thinking I would wait 15 minutes. 30 at most. When they left, I still hadn't finished my morning coffee. I placed the paper cup on the armrest, the one with a crack Brian once said he'd fix later. The cup was soft now. The machine-brewed coffee had long turned cold and stale, but I sipped it anyway, holding on to the last bit of warmth in my throat. At this age, you learn to be thankful even for things that are no longer whole. Half an hour passed. I looked at the clock, 11:47. Sunlight slid across the hood of the car that had vanished into the pine trees. I looked around. This small rest stop had nothing much. A white cement restroom, two wooden picnic tables, an overflowing blue trash bin, and a soggy information board with a peeling map. The sky looked like rain, or at least the kind of sticky wind August brings, humid, dense, and pressing. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, and dialed Brian. No answer. I tried again, then a third time. Each ring ended in silence. I sent a message. "Where are you?" No reply. I didn't panic. Not yet. I still held on to a thin thread of blind trust. Maybe Brian lost signal. Maybe the kids were distracted. Maybe Jenna pulled him aside to talk. But then 1 hour passed. Then 2. I sat on the wooden bench beside the restroom, back leaning against the wall, my light jacket rolled into a pillow behind my neck. In front of me, everything was still. No sign of the silver SUV. I stepped into the restroom and looked at myself in the mirror. An old man with silver hair, sunken cheeks, and dark circles under his eyes. I splashed water on my face, braced my hands on the sink, let out a dry laugh imagining what people might say if they saw me like this. Just an old man left in the woods because his family needed a little space. That's when it began to click. Not a clear thought, just a growing weight. The kind of silence that lets you hear your own mind better. And it whispered, "Harold, this wasn't an accident. This was planned." I slowly walked the perimeter of the lot, then returned to the bench. I retraced the trip in my mind, the way Jenna kept asking if I wanted to stop and rest, even when I hadn't said I was tired. The way Brian checked the time over and over. How Caleb stared out the window, never saying goodbye when the car pulled in. The half sentences, the averted eyes, the general rush in the air. Like a play had been written, and I was just an extra who didn't get the script. I checked for my wallet. Not there. Probably still in the car. Same with my blood pressure medication. My documents, my car key, my care. all still on the SUV that could now be hundreds of miles away. I tried calling Jenna. No ring. Tried Brian again. Still nothing. The truth I didn't want to believe began to settle in. My eyes stared into the open trail where their car should have returned, and my heart sank like a stone tossed into water, never surfacing again. There's a strange moment in a man's life. A father, a grandfather, someone once called a rock, a pillar, when he finally understands that he's become a burden. I didn't cry. I just felt my hands tremble as I opened my phone and searched for the tracking app. I still had it installed. Brian asked me to keep the car under my name last year to get a lower insurance rate. I logged in. The vehicle wasn't nearby. The last location pinged 1 hour and 47 minutes ago, headed east on Interstate 16 toward Savannah. They weren't coming back. They had driven away. I stared at the screen, then turned it off. I pushed myself up, slightly dizzy. Rain began to fall in light drops on the restroom roof. I sat back on the bench, pulled my jacket tight around my neck, and let the slow cold of reality settle in. I wasn't just left behind. This was official. No, not left behind, removed. This was the final chapter in a plan that had been unfolding for months. I once thought I was being ignored. Now I knew. I had been programmed to disappear. I thought of my wife, Ruth. If she were still alive, things would have been different. Ruth never let anyone mistreat me. She taught Brian to say thank you, taught him to appreciate. But Ruth was gone, and it felt like when she passed, every decent memory in this family went with her. It wasn't until 4 in the afternoon that a middle-aged couple pulled into the lot. The man got out first, looked at me, and said, "Hey there, you okay? Looks like you've been here a while." I looked up, nodded. I was left here. "Oh my God," the woman said quietly. "Do you want to call someone?" I smiled, faint as smoke. I already tried. They didn't pick up. The man, Daniel, let me charge my phone from his car. His wife brought me water. I didn't want to be a problem. I just asked if they could take me to the nearest police station. They nodded. On the way, I stared out the window, watched the pines slide by, listened to the rain tapping steadily on the car roof. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a plan began to form. Not for revenge, but for dignity. I wasn't going to call Brian again. I was going to call my lawyer. I left the police station the next morning. They kept me overnight for observation, asked questions gently, checked my vitals, took my statement, handed me a list of senior assistant centers in case you want to file a complaint. I thanked them politely, folded the paper, tucked it into the inner pocket of my coat, along with the silence that had soaked in deep. I did not want to file a complaint. I didn't need pity. I only needed the truth and the right to be a father in the truest sense. I returned to Asheville. On the overnight bus, sitting next to an old Mexican woman murmuring prayers in Spanish, I pulled out a faded yellow business card from my wallet. The print still read clearly, Edith R. Langston, attorney at law, retired but never defeated. On the back, Ruth's handwriting in blue ink. If anything ever happens, Harold, call Edith. She keeps her word better than blood relatives ever will. I hadn't called her since Ruth's funeral, but now I needed to. Edith Langston opened the door to her small cabin in North Asheville, once her private office. She was thinner, her hair fully silvered now, but her eyes still sharp and her voice still a grinding machine. "Harold, sit down, speak. What brings you back to me after 4 years of silence?" I told her everything, not skipping a detail. From the $90,000 I withdrew, to the loan agreement Brian signed, to the way they slowly erased me from their lives. Until the day they left me at that rest stop with a simple, "We'll be back." Edith listened without interrupting. At the end, she pulled out an old file from her desk drawer. "We once signed a collateral-backed loan contract, didn't we?" "I still have a photocopy." "Good. If he defaulted or violated the terms, you have every right to reclaim the secured asset. The problem," I said, "is I don't know if it's still legally valid. They've used the house as collateral for something else. I have a feeling they crossed a line somewhere." Edith pushed her glasses up her nose. "Then that's where we start." 4 days later, I returned to her office, this time with copies of financial statements from the bank, card transaction history, and Brian's loan file that I quietly requested from the branch I used to consult for before retirement. Edith spent the entire morning reviewing each item. That idiot thought old people can't read numbers, she muttered as tapping one transaction. March 21st. Internal transfer, $15,000. Recipient name, J. Whitman. April 4th. BMW showroom payment, $12,875. Note says down payment. Jenna's name is on that car, Edith said, but the funds came directly from Brian's account, the same account linked to your loan. So they used your loan money to buy her a car. That's right. Can I sue? We'll do more than sue. That afternoon, Edith called an old contact, a retired investigator named Martin Hale. He used to work for the IRS and could sniff out money trails like a trained hound. He agreed to take the case. Martin met me that Saturday morning with a laptop and a thick stack of printed spreadsheets. I found some secondary loans, Harold, he said in a low voice. Brian remortgaged the house to a shady lender in Savannah. They didn't properly verify documentation. That can qualify as fraudulent intent. You sure? I have both contracts right here, and the original agreement you and Edith signed, still enforceable. He paused, looked me in the eye. They assumed you were too old to handle finances, but they didn't know you were once an aerospace financial engineer. I gave a faint smile. They also didn't know I was still sharp enough to rise again. A week later, Edith sent the first document, a formal demand for loan repayment. To Brian Whitman, Jenna Whitman, subject, breach of loan contract number 1290, 8HW. Repayment due, 14 days. Consequence of non-payment. Asset repossession. I didn't call, didn't message, no warnings. I just waited. On the 11th day, they replied by email, not Brian, but someone claiming to be Rick Dalton, the family's attorney. Rick wrote, Harold Whitman gave funds to his son as a non-repayable gift. Edith responded in 3 lines. Attached are the original loan contract, bank transfer records, and evidence of unauthorized use of collateral for secondary loans. Prepare for litigation. While we waited, Martin and I uncovered something more. Brian registered credit in the name of a small company, then quietly transferred house ownership to that company to avoid personal seizure. In court, that could be deemed fraudulent asset shielding. I didn't want prison for them. I just wanted them to know I was no longer the old man who waited in silence. On the 14th day, Brian called. His voice was shaking. I could hear someone crying in the background. Dad, are you really going through with this? Going through with what? Taking back the house. I'm only following the contract and the law. You're destroying this family. You did that first, the day you left me at the rest stop. I'm sorry. I don't need an apology, Brian. I need respect. And if I don't get it, I'll take it back through the law. I hung up. My eyes were dry, my hands steady. There was only one thing left inside me: clarity. On the 3rd day after Brian's last call, I received a light brown sealed envelope with no return address. It had been slid under the door of the motel where I was temporarily staying in Hendersonville, the place I rented month to month while waiting for the legal process to unfold. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a filed complaint to Georgia's Child Protective Services, the content accused. Harold Whitman, suspected of mental instability, allegedly abandoned a minor grandchild at a roadside rest stop, potentially dangerous to children. Request for cognitive competency investigation. Printed signature below, Brian Whitman. Submission date, 1 week earlier. I folded it and placed it on the table. Something warm stirred in my chest. Not anger, but a dreary, hollow kind of grief. My son, the boy who once held my hand crossing the street in the 90s, now labeled me mentally unstable just to keep a house that never belonged to him. I picked up the phone and called Edith. She answered almost instantly. CPS is involved, I said. I figured, Edith sighed. It's an old trick. Attack cognitive competence. If you react strongly, they say you are unstable. If you stay silent, they use that as proof. What should I do? We don't play by their rules. We play by the rules of truth. 3 days later, a CPS officer named Monique Rhodes visited me at the motel. She was a black woman in her mid-40s, hair neatly braided, wearing a gray suit, voice gentle like a nurse, but eyes that scanned thoroughly. "I'm here to verify a reported concern," she said. "Do you have a response?" "I have evidence," I replied. "But before I show it, I want to ask. CPS has a duty to investigate both sides, correct?" "Correct." "Then I'll provide audio recordings and footage from the rest stop camera that day." She looked at me, surprised. I opened my laptop and pulled out the small external hard drive. It was a backup from the aid station camera system. Martin had extracted it during our early investigation. The clip showed the scene at 11:42 a.m. Brian's SUV pulling up to the restroom area. Brian stepped out, opened the door for me, waved cheerfully. Jenna stood outside holding the kids' hands as they ran up the hill. The clip continued to 11:55. The SUV drove away. I remained seated. There was no argument, no chaos, just a cold abandonment, clear as midday light. Is this the original footage? I have a signed confirmation from the station manager. I also have a voice recording of Brian saying we'll be right back. If needed, I can submit everything. Monique watched in silence. Then she shut the laptop gently and took out a notepad. "I'll record everything." "What else did he say to CPS?" I asked. "That you had episodes of confusion, lost track of dates, wandered off, once yelled at the kids." He said I'm senile. He didn't use the word. But the implication was there. I was an aerospace systems analyst for over 30 years. I still read the financial news every morning. I remember my account numbers, my watch's serial number, and the Wi-Fi password from 2009. I'm not losing my mind. I just lost my trust. Monique nodded slowly, then added, "I've seen this before. Children accusing their parents to seize financial control. It's becoming more common. You think I'm retaliating? I think you're reclaiming your rightful place." That evening, Edith called back. She'll conclude there's no sign of mental decline. But Brian won't stop there. "I just received notice from their attorney. They're initiating a claim for property rights, arguing you're no longer competent to manage the transferred assets." I chuckled lightly. "I never transferred the house to them." "Exactly. And I've already drafted the counterclaim." "Thank you, Edith." "No, thank you. You've given me a reason to keep fighting." A week later, the first hearing was held at Buncombe County Civil Court. I sat between Martin and Edith. Brian arrived with Jenna, both dressed neatly like it was Sunday service, wearing fake concern on their faces. Their lawyer stood, presenting a thick packet of documents. "They'll say you once missed a doctor's appointment," Edith whispered. They'd be right. But my car broke down that day, not my memory, and they'll use the kids. I sighed. Caleb hasn't spoken to me all year. I don't expect him to take my side. The judge flipped through the file. "Mr. Harold Whitman, do you have a response to the motion for cognitive evaluation?" Edith stood. "Your Honor, we submit video footage, audio recordings, a CPS officer's signed statement, and an independent cognitive assessment by a court-appointed psychiatrist. Mr. Whitman is fully competent, mentally sound, and the victim of manipulative false claims aimed at asset control." The judge reviewed in silence. Brian kept his head down. Jenna stared at me, unblinking. I didn't need to win that day, but I had already made them take a step back. I saw it in Jenna's eyes as she clenched her handbag so tight her knuckles turned white. I saw it when Brian looked away, unable to meet the eyes that once taught him how to read. After the hearing, I walked out alone. The air was mild, the sun gentle. I sat on a stone bench near the parking lot, exhaled slowly, and told myself, don't fight back with bitterness. Rise with truth. That's how they'll learn to be ashamed. The court ruled in my favor. The loan agreement remained valid. Brian's use of collateralized property to secure additional loans without legal consent placed them under fraud investigation. The house belonged to me. There was no longer a need to argue. I didn't return to it. I handed the house over to a real estate firm and sold it for a modest price. From that money, I bought a small cabin near Lake Hartwell in northern Georgia, the place Ruth once dreamed of retiring to. A wooden house, a wood-burning stove, a small porch just big enough for a rocking chair, facing the water. I lived there quietly. Each morning, I brewed black coffee and turned on the radio for news. In the afternoon, I fished. At night, I read. For the first time in years, I felt my life was no longer dictated by anyone else. One autumn morning, I received a handwritten envelope. The sender, Caleb, my grandson. The handwriting was firm, slightly shaky. Grandpa, I'm sorry I believed them. I saw everything in Mom's messages. I don't understand how people could treat you like that. I miss you. I miss how you cut apples for me, how you taught me to ride a bike. I'm sorry. Caleb, I read it and sat still for a long time. Finally, I wrote a few lines on brown paper. Caleb, I don't need an apology, just the truth. If one day you grow tired of the world, Grandpa's little cabin by the lake is always open, not for escape, but to remember who you are. Grandpa. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and drove to the post office near town. The old woman at the counter asked, "Where's it going, sir?" I smiled, sending it back to what should never have been lost. That afternoon, I sat on the porch, watching the windless lake, a soft breeze brushing my sleeves. I didn't need to return to demand justice. I only needed to hold on to the peace I had reclaimed. I was no longer the father who once waited at a rest stop. I was the man who had moved forward without needing anyone to lead the way. I was no longer the father who once waited at a rest stop. I was the man who had moved forward without needing anyone to lead the way. If you've ever been left behind, ever been dismissed, ever been treated like you no longer mattered, remember, you can still begin again. In silence, in truth, and in the dignity they can never take from you. My story ends here, but perhaps somewhere within you, a similar journey is waiting to be written. If you saw yourself in this story, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss these quiet paths to rebirth. And if you've been through something like I did, don't hesitate to share it in the comments. Here, you're not alone.